Welcome to Nero Secrets. I'm your host, Jimmy. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more mystery stories. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The Diary with No Dates. There are 3 things that will make Nero Wolfe groan before his second cup of beer. The sound of a woman crying, an unexpected client arriving during his orchid hour, and the phrase, "I can't go to the police." Thursday at 11:12 a.m. we hit all 3. I had just finished sorting out a week's worth of Wolfe's clipped articles, mostly gardening obituaries and academic disputes over orchid subspecies, when Fritz buzzed the office from downstairs. Wolfe had already retreated to the plant rooms upstairs, where he fondled his precious hybrids like a Roman emperor indulging his favourite slaves. Fritz's voice came through the intercom, low and distressed. "Archie, there is a woman. She is upset. She says she will not leave." "Crying upset?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "She's very determined. And also shaking. That got my curiosity piqued, but not my feet moving. I was still considering whether this situation warranted an interruption when the door to Wolfe's plant sanctum opened upstairs. He descended the steps slowly, pausing halfway to give me the full glacial stare. "Must I assume," he said, voice as frosty as his stare, "that you intend to resolve this intrusion by inertia?" "Only if it works," I said, standing. "But seeing as you've descended into the mortal realm, I assume it hasn't." He muttered something under, his breath probably Latin and not friendly, and waved a hand. I opened the door. The woman who stepped in looked like a leftover from a different season. Her coat was tailored but rumpled, like it hadn't been off the hanger in years. Her hair had been pinned with care and then ravaged by stress. She clutched a leather-bound diary to her chest, like it might leap from her arms and sprint away. "Name is Eloise Rayner," she said, "and I don't know where else to go." Wolfe, still halfway down the stairs, halted like a man hit by a sudden draught. "Miss Rayner, unless your life is in immediate danger, or your problem is botanical, your timing is egregious." She didn't flinch. "It's about my father and his diary. He's dead, and something is wrong." Now, that got Wolfe's attention. Not the dead father part, we get at least one of those a week, but the diary. Wolfe has a thing for records, journals, precise accounts. He may not move much, but the man thrives on the movement of words. He completed his descent with the gravity of a pope, processing down a cathedral aisle. "You have 3 minutes. Sit and be exact." We ushered her into the office. The diary never left her grip. Her fingers clung to it with white-knuckled defiance. "My father, Kenneth Rayner," she began, "was a financial advisor. Quiet, private, very methodical. A week ago, he fell from his apartment window in the West 70s. They called it suicide. But I know he kept a diary, every day. He never missed an entry. And," Wolfe said. She opened the leather book and handed it to me. "It's blank." I flipped through the thing. Dozens of pages, handmade, cream-coloured, high-quality stock. Not one word, not even a date. "No dates, no ink, no pressure marks," I said. "Brand new." "No," she insisted, leaning forward. "That's his diary. I found it in his safe, where he always kept it. But it's been wiped or replaced. Something is missing." Wolfe shifted in his chair. You believe someone altered or removed the contents of this volume. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I think someone pushed him. And I think whatever he wrote in that diary made them do it. That was enough to get a raised eyebrow from Wolfe. Not a commitment, but a twitch of the brow muscle, which in his world is practically a handshake and a signed affidavit. "Miss Rayner," he said, his tone shifting into neutral gear, "I accept cases on the basis of logic, not sentiment. If your father was indeed pushed, the police are better equipped to investigate." "They won't," she snapped. "They said there was no sign of struggle and no motive. They found nothing suspicious in his finances or relationships, just a clean apartment and a broken body on the sidewalk. But I know my father. He would never have jumped." She stood abruptly and placed a sealed envelope on Wolfe's desk. "This came in the mail this morning. No return address. Postmarked 2 days ago. Inside was a photo of my father sitting at his desk, and on that desk is that diary, open with writing on the pages. I took the envelope, slid the photo out, and whistled low. The photo was clear, candid, and unmistakable. There was Kenneth Rayner in mid-sentence, pen in hand. And on the desk, in plain view, was the diary, open and visibly filled with ink. Wolfe stared at the image for a long moment. Then his nostrils flared. "This," he said slowly, "is irregular," which, translated from Wolferese, meant "you have my attention." He walked over to the globe, and rotated it absent-mindedly. That's Wolfe speak for cogitation. Finally, he turned to me. "Archie, you will retrieve the incident report on Mr. Rayner's death, then visit the building. Speak to the doorman, the neighbours, anyone who saw or heard anything. Miss Rayner, leave the diary and the envelope. Fritz will show you out." "But," she started. "If," Wolfe interrupted, "there is a crime here, I shall find it. If not, then you will at least have the satisfaction of having asked the right man." She left reluctantly, her heels clicking like punctuation marks of desperation. Wolfe sank into his chair, tented his fingers and murmured, "A diary with no dates, no ink, and yet a photograph to prove otherwise. Archie, I fear someone has been rewriting history." I picked up my coat. "I'll go knock on New York's doors. But if someone's faking diaries, I hope they left a few crumbs behind." I didn't know then that I was walking into a mess of secrets, a circle of liars, and a puzzle even Wolfe would need a second beer to unwind. But hey, who needs a quiet day? Chapter 2. The Man Who Didn't Jump. I spent the next hour and a half playing my usual part, inquisitive, well-dressed nuisance. The kind of guy who smiles just enough to make you talk and writes just fast enough to make you regret it. Kenneth. Rayner's building was one of those grey mid-century monoliths on West 74th, the kind that tried to look elegant, but settled for cleanliness. The doorman, a stiff 30-something named Desmond, with a crisp uniform and an expression that said, "Don't ask me, I just work here," remembered the incident with the enthusiasm of someone recalling a bad elevator inspection. Mr. Rayner kept to himself. Desmond told me, arms folded. Polite, tipped at Christmas, didn't speak unless spoken to. "Sounds like my boss," I said, "only with less orchids and more eye contact." Desmond didn't crack a smile. He came in the night before he fell. Around 8. Didn't leave again, far as I know. Quiet. Nothing unusual. "Visitors?" I asked. He shook his head. Not that I saw, but he did get a package earlier that day. Small, wrapped plain brown. No return label. I logged it, if you want to check. I do. He led me to a small desk inside the lobby. The log showed that at 3:12 p.m. a package had arrived for Kenneth Rayner. No courier listed, just left by hand. Now that was interesting. The superintendent, a stocky gent named Arnold Pappas, was next on my list. He lived in the basement unit and looked like he'd once tried out for the Yankees, but missed the call and never quite got over it. He was more talkative than the doorman. Mr. Rainier. Yeah, I remember when it happened, Pappas said, lighting a cigarette. Terrible thing. He was on the 6th floor. Not a guy who struck me as suicidal, but you never can tell. Quiet men. Carry heavy things sometimes. Any visitors? I repeated. Nope. He was a ghost. Came, went, paid rent early, never raised his voice. Kept that apartment like a museum. I only went in once, years ago, to check the wiring. Spotless. He tapped his ash into a faded ashtray. You ask me, the whole thing smells off. I perked up. Why's that? He looked around like someone might be listening. Because of the timing. One of the other tenants, old lady on 5B, said she heard 2 voices arguing that night, but she was half asleep and didn't want to stir the pot. Now we were getting somewhere. Can I talk to her? She's around. Name's Mrs. Withers. Don't take it personally if she asks whether you're selling funeral plots. Mrs. Withers turned out to be 90 pounds of suspicion wrapped in a lavender cardigan. Her eyes were sharp enough to cut diamonds. Young man, she said, eyeing my notebook like it might explode. Are you here to sell me something or cause trouble? Trouble, mostly, I said, smiling. But just the legal kind. I'm looking into Kenneth Rayner's death. I hear you may have heard something that night. She hesitated. Then, in a voice that trembled just slightly, she said, I heard a man shout. Not Mr. Rayner. Someone younger, angrier. Then a thud, like furniture tipping. Then silence. No police report, I told the officer, but he said the scene showed no sign of a struggle. That was the word he used. Scene. Like it was a play and someone forgot their line. I jotted it down. What time was that? After 11. I remember because I'd just turned off the Jack Parr show. Her memory was impressive. So was her bitterness. Back outside, I made a call to Lon Cohen at the Gazette. If there was one guy who could pull the coroner's file with less red tape and more speed than a city clerk, it was Lon. Archie, he said, you owe me lunch. I owe you 6. Just tell me if Kenneth Rayner had anything in his tox screen. Lon whistled low. Clean, no alcohol, no barbiturates, healthy heart, no notes found, no witnesses, just splat. Classy. And you're? Sure, no pressure marks. No sign he was, say, helping along? Lon was quiet for a moment. Not in the official report, but the body had bruises inconsistent with a solo fall. Small ones, upper arms, like someone grabbed him. Now that was more than interesting. It was Wolfe-worthy. I took a cab back to the brownstone, my brain running faster than usual. When I walked into the office, Wolfe was back in his chair, a book on ancient Egyptian agriculture open on his stomach, eyes closed. He opened one eye as I entered. Report. I sat. Rayner got a hand-delivered package the afternoon he died. Courier. Doorman didn't see who dropped it off. A tenant upstairs heard two men arguing that night. The super thinks it smells wrong, and the tox screen says Rayner was clean, but the body had unexplained bruises on both arms. The official word is still suicide. The unofficial word is it wasn't. Wolfe closed the book slowly, as if the papyrus farming practices of 1550 BC could wait. He laced his fingers together and stared at the ceiling. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "this is beginning to reek of design. There is a pattern here. Concealed, yes, but not obliterated. The diary, the missing entries, the package." He looked at the photo again. That diary existed, in that form, with contents, which have vanished. I stood. "Want me to dig up who took that photo?" "Indeed. That is the thread we must pull." I grabbed my coat again. "All right, but I'm billing overtime if this leads to another man with a camera and a gun." Wolfe shut his eyes again. "You are not billing me. I am enduring you. Fair enough." I left the brownstone with a fresh trail in my sights, and that photo of the diary burned into my brain. Somewhere in this city, someone had rewritten a man's life, and I was going to find the editor. Chapter 3. The Man Behind the Lens. The time I tracked down the photographer, I'd collected 3 dead ends, 1 soggy hot dog, and a mild sunburn from pacing 6th Avenue. But as Wolfe likes to remind me, persistence is not a virtue, Mr. Goodwin. It is a necessity for the intellectually modest. I suppose that was his fancy way of saying I don't give up, which for this case was a good thing. The back of the photo Miss Rayner left us had a faint stamp, Finster and Bachman, Studios, W44th, so I made that my first stop. The receptionist was one of those artistic types who wore all black and acted like she invented film. She wasn't much help until I pulled out my best bluff, the official interest look paired with my practiced deadpan. "I'm not the police," I said, "which means you'll probably survive this conversation." That got a smile and a name. The photographer was Morton Bachman, a man with thinning hair, a neat moustache, and a fondness for bow ties that matched nothing else. He greeted me in his cluttered little office behind the studio, where the walls were lined with dusty portraits of weddings, bar mitzvahs, and real estate agents trying to look like movie stars. "Miss Rayner," he said, tapping a cigarette against the edge of his desk. "Yes, she came in a few months ago, asked for a discreet session, said her father was shy, didn't like fuss, wanted some candid shots for a private album." "Do any of them show this diary?" I asked, handing him the photo. He peered at it. "That's one of mine. I remember it now. That was taken 3 weeks before he died. Can you tell me why the diary in this shot is full of ink, and the one we have is blank as a priest's tax return?" He frowned. "I just took the photos, mister. I don't ask about journals." "Then maybe you can help me with something else. Who else has copies of this? Did she order prints?" He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick black binder. "Nope. She ordered 2 sets, both in sealed envelopes. One for her, one she said was for her father's lawyer. Paid in cash. Tell me to delete the negatives after printing." "And did you?" "Mostly." He winced, like he was caught halfway between confession and self-preservation. "I keep backups. Old habit. You never know when a client will lose their copy and come screaming. Let me guess, you still have the film. I might. That was good enough. I leaned back in my chair. Let's make a deal. I want to see every shot you took that day, especially the ones you didn't send. 10 minutes later, I was at his light table flipping through the negatives with a loupe like a discount detective in a noir flick. Most of the shots were unremarkable. Rayner reading, writing, drinking tea. But 3 frames in, I saw something that made me stop cold. One image showed Rayner at his desk, smiling faintly, pen in hand. But off to the side, barely in frame, was a shadow. Not his. The angle was wrong. It stretched from the hallway, not the desk lamp. Someone had been standing just outside the room when the photo was taken. I tapped the light table. This one. Blow it up. Morton looked confused. It's just a shadow. Shadows belong to people, and I want to see this one. He obliged. The enlargement made things clearer, though not crystal. A partial shoulder, a blur that could have been a Auger jacket, maybe a hat brim, maybe not. It wasn't conclusive, but it wasn't nothing. Did you ever meet the father? I asked. Nope, she handled everything. Came to pick up the prints, gave instructions, paid in cash. Did she seem nervous, paranoid? He considered. Not paranoid, just sad, like she was trying to preserve something before it disappeared. I left with a copy of the blown-up image and Bachman's assurance that no one else had requested prints. Back in the cab, I studied the shadow again. Wolfe was right. This wasn't a suicide. This was staging. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was reading a treatise on ancient culinary techniques of the Roman Empire. I walked in, tossed the enlarged photo on his desk, and waited. He adjusted his glasses, squinted at the image, and let out a breath. Ah, he said softly, and at last our ghost appears. I sat. You think that's the killer? No. I think that is the person responsible for the diary's disappearance. The killer may be someone else entirely. But this person, this shadow, they were in the apartment after the diary was written, but before it vanished. He picked up the original photo and studied it alongside the new one. This confirms the diary existed in written form. Therefore, its current condition, blank, is artificial. It has been replaced or erased. The question is, why? I nodded. And more importantly, how did a sealed safe end up holding a fake? Wolfe tapped the envelope Eloise had left. Miss Rayner has omitted something. She's either unaware or unwilling to tell us. I stood again. Want me to press her? He shook his head. Not yet. We need more context. We must trace the diary's journey from the moment of its last appearance in this photograph to its reappearance in the safe. He turned his chair toward the window. Archie, find the lawyer she mentioned, the one who was supposed to receive the second envelope. Any idea where to start? Her father was a financial advisor. He would have retained counsel for his estate. Begin with probate filings. Then widen your net. Be clever. He didn't need to say it twice. I was already out the door. I had a list forming in my head. The diary, the photographer, the lawyer, and the shadow. One of them knew why Kenneth Rayner died. And if Wolfe had his way, they were all going to talk, whether they meant to or not. Chapter 3. The Man Behind the Lens. The time I tracked down the photographer, I'd collected 3 dead ends, 1 soggy hot dog, and a mild sunburn from pacing 6th Avenue. But as Wolfe likes to remind me, persistence is not a virtue, Mr. Goodwin. It is a necessity for the intellectually modest. I suppose that was his fancy way of saying I don't give up, which for this case was a good thing. The back of the photo Miss Rayner left us had a faint stamp, Finster and Bachman, Studios, W44th, so I made that my first stop. The receptionist was one of those artistic types who wore all black and acted like she invented film. She wasn't much help until I pulled out my best bluff, the official interest look paired with my practiced deadpan. "I'm not the police," I said, "which means you'll probably survive this conversation." That got a smile and a name. The photographer was Morton Bachman, a man with thinning hair, a neat moustache, and a fondness for bow ties that matched nothing else. He greeted me in his cluttered little office behind the studio, where the walls were lined with dusty portraits of weddings, bar mitzvahs, and real estate agents trying to look like movie stars. "Miss Rayner," he said, tapping a cigarette against the edge of his desk. "Yes, she came in a few months ago, asked for a discreet session, said her father was shy, didn't like fuss, wanted some candid shots for a private album. Do any of them show this diary?" I asked, handing him the photo. He peered at it. "That's one of mine. I remember it now. That was taken 3 weeks before he died. Can you tell me why the diary in this shot is full of ink, and the one we have is blank as a priest's tax return?" He frowned. "I just took the photos, mister. I don't ask about journals." "Then maybe you can help me with something else. Who else has copies of this? Did she order prints?" He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick black binder. "Nope. She ordered 2 sets, both in sealed envelopes. One for her, one she said was for her father's lawyer. Paid in cash. Tell me to delete the negatives after printing." "And did you?" "Mostly." He winced, like he was caught halfway between confession and self-preservation. "I keep backups. Old habit. You never know when a client will lose their copy and come screaming." "Let me guess, you still have the film." I might. That was good enough. I leaned back in my chair. "Let's make a deal. I want to see every shot you took that day, especially the ones you didn't send." 10 minutes later, I was at his light table flipping through the negatives with a loupe like a discount detective in a noir flick. Most of the shots were unremarkable. Rayner reading, writing, drinking tea. But 3 frames in, I saw something that made me stop cold. One image showed Rayner at his desk, smiling faintly, pen in hand. But off to the side, barely in frame, was a shadow. Not his. The angle was wrong. It stretched from the hallway, not the desk lamp. Someone had been standing just outside the room when the photo was taken. I tapped the light table. "This one. Blow it up." Morton looked confused. "It's just a shadow." "Shadows belong to people, and I want to see this one." He obliged. The enlargement made things clearer, though not crystal. A partial shoulder, a blur that could have been a Auger jacket, maybe a hat brim, maybe not. It wasn't conclusive, but it wasn't nothing. "Did you ever meet the father?" I asked. "Nope. She handled everything. Came to pick up the prints, gave instructions, paid in cash. Did she seem nervous? Paranoid?" He considered. Not paranoid, just sad, like she was trying to preserve something before it disappeared. I left with a copy of the blown-up image and Bachman's assurance that no one else had requested prints. Back in the cab, I studied the shadow again. Wolfe was right. This wasn't a suicide. This was staging. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was reading a treatise on ancient culinary techniques of the Roman Empire. I walked in, tossed the enlarged photo on his desk, and waited. He adjusted his glasses, squinted at the image, and let out a breath. "Ah," he said softly, "and at last our ghost appears." I sat. "You think that's the killer?" "No. I think that is the person responsible for the diary's disappearance. The killer may be someone else entirely. But this person, this shadow, they were in the apartment after the diary was written, but before it vanished." He picked up the original photo and studied it alongside the new one. This confirms the diary existed in written form. Therefore, its current condition, blank, is artificial. It has been replaced or erased. The question is, why? I nodded. And more importantly, how did a sealed safe end up holding a fake? Wolfe tapped the envelope Eloise had left. "Miss Rayner has omitted something. She's either unaware or unwilling to tell us." I stood again. "Want me to press her?" He shook his head. "Not yet. We need more context. We must trace the diary's journey from the moment of its last appearance in this photograph to its reappearance in the safe." He turned his chair toward the window. "Archie, find the lawyer she mentioned, the one who was supposed to receive the second envelope. Any idea where to start? Her father was a financial advisor. He would have retained counsel for his estate. Begin with probate filings. Then widen your net. Be clever." He didn't need to say it twice. I was already out the door. I had a list forming in my head. The diary, the photographer, the lawyer, and the shadow. One of them knew why Kenneth Rayner died. And if Wolfe had his way, they were all going to talk, whether they meant to or not. Chapter 4. The Lawyer Who Wasn't Looking. If you ever find yourself combing through probate court files in Midtown Manhattan, do yourself a favor and bring coffee, patience, and a decent alibi. The clerk behind the counter had all the warmth of an unplugged radiator and none of the urgency you'd associate with someone whose job was to confirm the legal fate of the dead. After 2 hours, a bit of charm, and a well-timed $5 bill slipped across the counter, for paperwork assistance, naturally. I walked out with a copy of Kenneth Rayner's will, and the name of his estate attorney, Lionel Merriweather. Esker, the office of Merriweather and Pratt, occupied a corner suite on the 14th floor of a sandstone-faced building just off Madison. It was the kind of firm where the furniture smelled like pipe tobacco and old money, and every receptionist looked like they could quote Lord Byron in litigation. The receptionist, red nails, horn-rimmed glasses, and a voice like dry paper, gave me the look over. "Do you have an appointment, Mr. Goodwin?" "No. But I've got something better. Curiosity." That bought me a slow blink and a short wait, during which I watched 2 junior associates argue over the correct Latin pronunciation of res ipsa loquitur. Spoiler. Neither of them had it right. When Merriweather finally appeared, he did so with the sort of grandeur that suggested he'd stepped directly out of a Dickens novel. Tall, silver-haired, and draped in a double-breasted suit that probably hadn't been off the rack since FDR was in office, He extended a hand with the careful caution of someone who didn't like fingerprints. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "my secretary tells me you're inquiring about Kenneth Rayner. I must inform you that the estate is currently in probate, and I am bound by confidentiality, sure, but I'm not asking for the will's contents. I'm here about a package, specifically a sealed envelope that was supposed to be delivered to you from Rayner's daughter." That slowed him down. "I received no such thing," he said after a pause. "Miss Rayner met with me once, shortly after her father's death. She was distraught. I advised her of the estate's timeline and responsibilities, but no mention was made of a delivery." "You're sure?" "She had 2 sets of photographs printed. She told the photographer one was for you." Merriweather frowned. Perhaps she meant to deliver something and forgot. She seemed preoccupied. I leaned forward. "Did she mention the diary?" That got a definite reaction. His posture stiffened, and he folded his hands in front of him like a funeral director. Mentioned her father kept one, asked if its contents could be referenced in the will. I told her, unless it was notarized or submitted as an addendum, it had no legal weight. But if she believed it had information related to his finances, you'd think she'd hand it over. He gave me a tight smile. "Mr. Goodwin, in my experience, grief clouds judgment. People misplace, misinterpret, or even manufacture things in the face of loss. Any idea who might have had access to the safe?" Merriweather shook his head. "Not unless she shared the combination. I was not involved in managing the apartment or its contents." I handed him a copy of the photo. "Do you recognize this?" He studied it carefully. "That is Kenneth's study. No doubt about it. And yes, that's the diary, or at least the object he used as one." He tapped the desk. "That's peculiar. He showed me a page once, a notation of some investment records. Handwritten, very exact. It's hard to imagine it being blank." "Yet it is," I said, rising. "Thanks for your time, Counselor. If that envelope ever arrives, don't open it. Call us instead." He raised an eyebrow. "Us? Nero Wolfe. That name had an effect." He gave a tight nod, and I left before he could ask any more questions. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was nestled in his chair, immersed in a monograph on medieval recipes for rose-petal jam. I'd seen him more animated, but not more focused. I filled him in on Merriweather, the missing envelope, and the photo recognition. Wolfe grunted. Miss Rayner did not deliver the second set. Curious. "She lied?" I asked. "Perhaps. Or she intended to, but was intercepted. Either way, it suggests interference. Someone did not want that photo, or the diary, in a lawyer's hands." He steepled his fingers and gazed toward the ceiling. "The diary once existed with content. Now it exists, but is void. The photographer captured it intact. The father died. The photo reappears, anonymously. The lawyer was meant to receive it, but did not. There is a gap. Someone inserted themselves into this sequence and swapped the diary," I added. "Yes, but that requires motive and access. Whoever altered the diary must have known its location, known what was in it, and had a reason to remove it. Could be the shadow in the photograph. Possibly. But let us not chase phantoms. Instead, we shall apply pressure." He gestured to the phone. "Call Miss Rayner. Ask her to return. I have questions, and she has answers, whether she realizes it or not." As I dialed, I caught Wolfe's expression. Not irritation, not quite satisfaction. Something in between, like a man who senses a puzzle is about to unlock, but only if the next piece clicks exactly into place. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't circling the truth. We were already inside it. The trick was finding the corner where the walls began to crack. Chapter 5. The Woman Who Didn't Deliver Lois. Raina arrived at the brownstone just after 5 o'clock, wrapped in the same charcoal grey coat she'd worn on her first visit, though it looked more like armour than outerwear now. She sat in the client chair across from Wolfe, clasping her gloved hands as if afraid something might slip from them. Truth, perhaps. Wolfe barely acknowledged her for the first minute. That was his style. Make them wait. Make them speak first. Me? I sat across from her with my notebook open and my chin in my hand, doing my best impression of a bored stenographer with sharp ears. Finally, Wolfe lifted his gaze from the photograph in front of him, the one with the diary open and inked, and spoke. "Miss Raina," he said, "you told us you delivered a second set of these photographs to your father's attorney, Lionel Merriweather." She nodded. "Yes, I intended to." "Intended," Wolfe repeated, "but I did not." A pause. Her lips tightened. "No," she said finally. "I didn't. Why not?" She glanced at me, then back to Wolfe. I got nervous. I kept thinking, what if it wasn't important? What if I made a fool of myself? It's one thing to show it to you. It's another to drag a lawyer into something I couldn't even explain. Wolfe grunted. "Miss Raina, you are either withholding information by choice or by instinct. Either way, it impedes my progress. I require clarity." Her fingers gripped the arms of the chair. "I didn't lie. I thought someone was watching me. I don't know who. I started seeing a man near my apartment. Always across the street, never close. A hat, long coat. I only caught him a couple times, but it rattled me. That's why I sent the envelope here instead." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "You sent it anonymously?" "Yes." "Why not simply give it to me in person?" "I didn't want it traced. If someone had been in my father's apartment, if they were following me, I didn't want them knowing I came here." I glanced at Wolfe. That track. Bachman said she paid in cash. If she was worried about being followed, it makes sense. She'd try to cover her trail. "Perhaps," Wolfe murmured. "But fear does not erase motive. Someone had access to your father's safe. Someone altered or replaced the diary. If you were aware of this risk, why not disclose it earlier?" She looked down. "Because part of me still wondered if I was imagining it." I scribbled a note in the margin of my pad. "She's scared, not stupid. There's a difference." Wolfe leaned back in his chair and laced his fingers. "Let us return to the matter of the diary. Your father was meticulous, yes?" "Very. He documented everything. Names, numbers, appointments. It was his way of organizing the world. Was there anyone he had recently spoken about with unease?" She hesitated. "There was a client," she said. "A new one. My father mentioned him once, said he was wealthy but secretive. Used an intermediary to meet. All cash investments, no paperwork. What was the name? I don't know. My father only referred to him as the Belgian." I blinked. "The Belgian?" "Yes, that's all I know. He said the man didn't want any traceable records." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "A man who prefers invisibility. And a client who records everything. A conflict. Exactly, she said. That's why it bothered my father. He didn't like dealing in the shadows. Wolfe turned his gaze to me. Archie, compile a list of recent large cash-based investments filed under Rayner's firm. Focus on intermediaries, front companies, or unusual names. If this Belgian exists, he left some residue. I nodded. On it. Eloise stood, but her expression was still unsettled. Do you think he's the one who— I do not think, Wolfe said, until I am ready to. But I do observe, and what I observe is this. Someone was willing to erase a diary, intercept an envelope, and follow you. That implies intent. Intent implies risk. And risk implies a secret worth killing for. I finished. Wolfe inclined his head. Precisely. Lingered at the door. You'll let me know when you learn something. I shall let Mr. Goodwin inform you, Wolfe said with a dismissive gesture. I do not traffic in half-formed suppositions. After she left, the brownstone was silent for a long minute. Wolfe returned to his chair, steepled his fingers again, and stared at the ceiling like the plaster might peel away to reveal the truth. This Belgian, I said, could be a ghost, could be a smokescreen. Could be the motive, Wolfe replied. A man who values discretion above all would find a diarist intolerable, especially one capable of revealing his dealings. I nodded. So, the diary wasn't just replaced, it was removed. The new one is a decoy. Indeed, which means somewhere the real one still exists. I got up, stretched, and grabbed my coat. Where are you going? Wolfe asked. To dig up the Belgian, I said, or whoever's pretending to be him. Be careful, Wolfe murmured, almost to himself. This game is no longer about proof. It is about silence. And someone has already chosen murder as a means to it. Chapter 6. The Man with No Name. By the time I started chasing the Belgian, I knew I wasn't really looking for a man. I was looking for a shadow. Someone rich enough to keep his name off the books, and careful enough to do it in a city where cab drivers remember what brand of cigarettes you smoked. Kenneth Rayner had worked at Wexler, Bloom & Crane, a boutique firm downtown that handled high-net-worth portfolios with the kind of discretion that made Swiss banks look chatty. I paid a visit, playing the part of a curious family friend, with a nose for loose ends and a voice that implied I might be holding a subpoena behind my back. The receptionist, a steel blonde with a silk scarf and zero patience, tried to brush me off with a smile made of glass, but persistence, a business card that said confidential research consultant, and the phrase ongoing investigation worked like a skeleton key. 15 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man named Darrell Vaughan, assistant manager of accounts and, judging by the nervous flicker in his eyes, the keeper of more than a few secrets. I can't give you client names, Vaughan said, crossing his legs and uncrossing them again. That's not just policy, it's law. Relax, I said. I'm not asking for social security numbers or bank passwords. Just looking into a private arrangement Mr. Rainier was involved in. A high-value client went by the Belgian. You've heard of him. That made Vaughan sit still. I've heard rumours. Good, I said. Tell me one. He hesitated, then leaned forward. Rayner handled a short series of high-yield investment placements a few months ago, cash-backed, No identifying paperwork beyond a holding company. Marble Key Holdings. Everything was clean on the surface. But Rayner didn't like it. He flagged it privately to our senior partner. Said he didn't trust the origin of the funds. They told him to ignore it. That's all I know. You see who brought the money in? A woman. Never gave her name. Came in twice. Classy, quiet, wore gloves even in summer. Said she was representing a foreign investor. Belgian. Accent, I guess. And this woman, could you describe her? I can do better. I have security footage. 10 minutes later, I was watching a grainy black and white video of a woman in a tailored coat, wide-brimmed hat, and sunglasses so big they looked like they were built for espionage. Her face was mostly hidden, but her posture was confident, deliberate. The way she carried the folder under her arm said she wasn't new to this game. I asked for a copy of the footage. Vaughan hesitated, then slipped me a USB stick under the table like it was a bad bribe in a political thriller. Back at the brownstone, I uploaded the footage to Wolfe's monitor in the office while he watched from his chair, expression unreadable. He leaned forward the moment the woman stepped into frame. "There," he said. "Pause it." I hit the space bar. "Zoom," he said, pointing at the handbag she carried. It was a designer purse, plain but expensive. But what caught Wolfe's eye was the small tag stitched into the strap. A gold-embossed logo barely visible in the frame. "Monge and Lavoie," Wolfe murmured. "Belgian luxury brand. Not sold in New York. Rare, but not impossible to acquire." You think she's the client? She's the intermediary. The client may not exist in any documented sense, but she does. And now we have a face, or at least a silhouette. He turned to me. What else? I filled him in on Marble Key Holdings, the cash investments, and Rayner's private objections. Wolfe nodded slowly. Rayner was preparing to disclose something, likely in the diary. He expressed concern, was ignored, and died shortly thereafter. The diary vanishes. A photograph appears, anonymously. You see, Archie, the rhythm? "Push, pull, disappear," I said. "Precisely." There was a knock at the door. Fritz entered with his usual silent grace, but his eyes were alert. "There is a man downstairs," he said. "He refuses to give his name. Says he has information about Mr. Rainier." That got Wolfe to sit straighter. "Send him in." The man who entered didn't look like a messenger. He looked like someone who spent more time in alleyways than offices. Mid-40s, tan trench coat, and a nose that had been broken at least once. He walked with a limp and a purpose. I was told this was the place to come if you didn't trust. The cops. Wolfe said nothing. I stepped forward. "You've got 30 seconds before we decide whether that's true." He sat without asking. "Name's Feller. I used to work in maintenance in Rayner's building. Quiet job. Until the night he died." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. I was fixing a drain in the basement when I saw someone leave through the service door. Late, almost midnight. Didn't recognize him. Tall guy, dark coat, hat. Moved fast. Could you describe him? Not much, but I followed him out. Thought he might be a burglar. He got into a black sedan, no plates. Any markings? Only thing I caught was a sticker in the back window. Some kind of logo. Looked like a chess piece. Wolfe turned to me. "Archie." "Got it," I said, already reaching for the phone. "I'll track down every car service, private firm, and security outfit in the city using a logo like that." Feller stood. That's all I got, but it's been bothering me. Rayner wasn't the type to fall. Wolfe nodded once. You've done well. Mr. Goodwin will see to it that you are compensated. After he left, Wolfe sat back in his chair, tapping his fingers together. We now have the architecture of a conspiracy. A faceless financier, a hidden intermediary, a silenced man, and a vanishing diary. The final question is simple. What truth was Rayner preparing to write down that cost him his life? And, I added, who wanted it buried badly enough to kill it? Wolfe closed his eyes. That, Archie, is what we shall now determine, one thread at a time. Chapter 7. The Queen on the Boardwolf spent the next morning in his chair, unmoving, except for the occasional adjustment of his cravat or the tilt of his head toward the window. It was his thinking posture, quiet, inert, but deceptively active. You could place a bonsai tree beside him and not tell which one was doing more. Meanwhile, I spent the morning working the phones. The logo fella mentioned, a chess piece in a car's rear window, was the closest thing we had to a trail. After 27 calls to private chauffeur firms, 24 hang-ups, and one enthusiastic conversation with a man who swore all chess was communist propaganda, I found it. A company called Rook Executive Services, based out of a quiet office in the Flatiron district, catered to high-level clients with anonymity and armoured doors. Their emblem, a single black rook. I set up a meeting under the name Charles Archer, one of my usual aliases, and showed up in a borrowed overcoat and wire-rimmed glasses to match. The office manager, a slick character with his hair parted like he sold insurance during the week and judgment on Sundays, greeted me with the careful diplomacy of someone used to lying professionally. "We value our client's privacy, Mr. Archer," he said, offering a seat. "May I ask the nature of your inquiry?" "You may," I replied. "I represent an interested party investigating a vehicle that departed West 74th Street on the night of Kenneth Rayner's death. Around midnight, no plates, but we have reason to believe it belonged to one of your fleet." His expression didn't flicker, but I noticed the tiniest shift in posture. "I'm afraid we don't confirm or deny specific bookings," I smiled. "I'm afraid I won't ask twice." I slid a copy of the surveillance still across the desk, the one showing the Belgian woman at Wexler Blumen Crane, handbag in view. That got a reaction. "I don't know her name," he said after a beat. "She's only listed in our system under a code, client number 918. Rides booked through a third party. Payment via Swiss account. Her car was dispatched 3 times last month. One of those times was the night you mentioned." "Where'd she go?" "We don't log destinations, but you log pickups." He hesitated, then opened a drawer. "Only because she authorized archival access last week. Routine backup. We caught it before deletion." He printed a manifest and handed it to me. 3 dates, 3 addresses. One of them was Kenneth Rayner's building, 10:57 p.m. pickup, 2 hours before his body was found. The destination, unlisted, but the trip ended 12 minutes later. Where would a car from that address get in 12 minutes? "Depends on the driver," he said, "but Midtown, easily." I left with the manifest and one more clue. The driver's name, Calvin Breen. I called Wolfe from a payphone near the corner. He hated cell phones. Claimed they were vulgar. I indulged him out of tradition, not belief. Driver's name is Breen, I said. I'll track him next. Duh, so, Wolfe said, but do not question him yet. I blinked. No, we are not ready. First, I need a name, the woman's. Find it. We cannot confront pieces on the board before we know which is the queen. Back to the office. I ran the handbag logo Wolfe spotted, Monge and Lavoie, through a fashion database. Not many sold in the US. Only one boutique in New York carried them, Nicolette's Atelier on Madison Avenue. The woman behind the counter, Nicolette herself apparently, was half French, half foghorn. She took one look at the screenshot I offered and lit up like I'd shown her a rare gemstone. That's our Rivière Noire, she said. Only 5 sold in the city this season. Let me check. She returned with a sales ledger and a champagne smile. Here we are. Sold to a Miss Vivian Lakehurst, paid in cash, reserved under special request, no tags, no receipts. Address. She declined to give one, but we delivered it to a hotel. The Fairwind, luxury, discreet, expensive. I thanked her and left, making a beeline to the Fairwind's velvet-draped lobby. The desk clerk had a waxed moustache and the patience of a saint. He gave me nothing until I flashed my credentials from the New York Financial Review, a fake magazine Wolfe had printed years ago for just this sort of occasion. Vivian Lakehurst had stayed for 3 weeks. Checked out 2 days after Raina's death. I checked the trash, literally. A quick word with the night janitor and a $20 handshake got me access to their archive of non-sensitive disposals. I found a torn room service slip with her name, but on the reverse, scribbled in pencil, was a single name and phone number, Vincent Teller, 917-555-6138. Back at the brownstone, I handed the note to Wolfe like it was a winning lottery ticket. He studied it. Vincent Teller, he murmured. We shall see if that is our rook or our king. I picked up the phone. Want me to call? No, Wolfe said. Let him come to us. Prepare a letter. Inform him that his name has surfaced in connection with a confidential financial investigation. Do not mention Miss Rayner. Do not mention Rayner at all. What name do I sign with? He didn't look up. Yours. I raised an eyebrow. You want me to be the bait? Wolfe's eyes finally met mine. Archie, in chess, sometimes the knight must move into danger, so the queen can be exposed. Charming. As I typed up the letter, I realized something. We weren't hunting the Belgian anymore. We were drawing her out, and the closer we got, the more I could feel it in my gut. We weren't just unraveling a financial cover-up. We were dancing with someone who killed with gloves on and wiped the prince clean. Chapter 8. The Man Who Answered Carefully. Vincent Teller called 3 hours after the letter was hand-delivered. Faster than expected, and just enough to make Wolfe say, which is the Wolfe equivalent of fireworks and a parade. Answered on the 3rd ring. Goodwin speaking. This is Vincent Teller. The voice was smooth, professional, controlled, the kind of tone you hear from lawyers who smile while they bury you in paperwork. I received a message. Something about a financial review? That's right, I said. We're reviewing a number of off-book investments that passed through Marble Key Holdings. Your name surfaced in our checks. I was hoping you could spare 15 minutes to clear things up. A pause. Not long, but waited. I see he said. "Well, I'm currently travelling, but I'll be back in the city tomorrow. Would late afternoon suit?" I gave him a fake office address in Midtown and told him to meet me there at 4. Wolfe preferred to keep the brownstone out of reach until absolutely necessary. Teller agreed without fuss and hung up, leaving behind a residue of confidence that made my hackles twitch. I turned to Wolfe, who was still staring at the note Eloise had left us, the one with the photograph and the now infamous blank diary. "Yoshannend took the bait," I said. "Good," Wolfe murmured. "Now we must determine what he thinks he's walking into, and if he's smart enough to walk out again," I added. The next day, I arrived early at the borrowed office space, a dusty old real estate showroom I'd used once to fake a meeting with an arms dealer. It was unremarkable, except for the broken ceiling fan and the smell of ancient carpet glue. I sat behind the desk with 2 empty folders in front of me, a coffee cup that hadn't seen actual coffee since the Eisenhower administration, and Wolfe's instructions in my head. Watch him, note everything. What he wears, how he reacts, what he avoids. At 3:59, Teller walked in. He was tall but not imposing. Hair slicked back with expensive restraint, grey suit tailored to within an inch of its fibres, and a tie the exact shade of diplomatic immunity. His shoes gleamed, his eyes didn't. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, extending a hand I didn't take. "Let's clear this up, shall we?" I gestured to the chair. "Please, let's pretend we're civilized." He sat, smoothly, like a man who was used to negotiations that involved 4 lawyers and a bottle of single malt. "I'll be frank," I said. "We're conducting an inquiry into Marble Key Holdings. There was a file connected to you, not by name, by association." "What association?" he asked. Not surprised, not insulted, curious. "A client operating under the pseudonym The Belgian. You were listed on a note found in her possession." He didn't blink. "And you're certain the note is legitimate?" "No," I said, "but you just confirmed it for me. That got him. A flicker. Tiny, fast. Barely enough to catch, but I did." His lips thinned, his foot adjusted slightly under the chair. "I never met this woman," he said, "but I was introduced to a series of private investment opportunities through a consultant. European. Very discreet. I never knew names. Did this consultant ever mention Kenneth Rayner?" "Only in the vaguest terms. He was described as a go-between. A vetting agent, I believe." "Did you know he died last week?" "Suicide, wasn't it?" he asked. Still smooth. "Maybe," I said. "But we're not in the business of guessing. We're in the business of connecting dots." He didn't answer. I leaned forward. "We have reason to believe Rayner documented all his dealings in a diary. That diary is now blank." "I see," he said again. It was his favourite phrase, neutral and meaningless. I pushed a copy of the surveillance photo across the desk. "Recognize her?" He looked. "Too long." "No." "You're lying," I said. Teller met my eyes for the first time. "You don't know that." "No, but I know people. And you just looked at that woman like you were checking to see which photo I had, not who was in it." Silence. He stood. "If this is going to escalate into accusations, I'll be going. I have nothing to hide. Then why the hesitation?" He adjusted his cuffs. "I hesitate when I'm being manipulated. Or when you're close to being caught." He didn't bite. just gave me a small, tight smile and left. Back at the brownstone, I relayed every detail, posture, tempo, facial tics. Wolfe listened silently, then spoke. Teller is not the architect. He's a pawn, but a willing one. He knows the woman, I said. I'd bet good Scotch on it. He knows more than the woman. He knows the contents of the diary, or at least what was in it. I sat. Then he's scared it might still exist. Wolfe nodded once, and that means someone else is scared too. Someone who paid for silence. The Belgian is not merely a nickname. It is a mask. We must now ask ourselves what face lies beneath it. He stood, a rare occasion, and crossed to the window. We are very close, Archie, but now the game shifts from inquiry to provocation. I didn't like the way he'd said it. Careful, I muttered. You're starting to sound like me. He didn't look back. Then by all means, go out and cause trouble. Chapter 9. The Diary That Refused to Stay. Lost provocation, Wolfe had said. He meant it in the chess sense, naturally. Baiting a response by nudging a piece out of position. But I've found that sometimes the best way to provoke a secret is to act like you already know it. So, I did just that. The next morning, I paid a second visit to Darrell Vaughan at Wexler, Bloom & Crane, our friend from the accounting floor with nervous eyes and a conscience that fluttered like a moth. He didn't expect to see me again, which made it all the more enjoyable when I walked into his cubicle unannounced and dropped a copy of the Teller interview on his desk. Well, I said, looks like your mysterious European intermediary had local help. Vaughan paled. You confronted Vincent Teller? He confronted me. We had a delightful conversation about the limits of plausible deniability. Vaughan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I don't know what you're looking for, Mr. Goodwin, but I can't lose my job over this. Neither could Rayner, and look how that turned out. That got him. He swallowed hard. There was a file, a secondary one. Rayner kept it on a locked flash drive, not company-issued. He never let it out of his sight. One day it disappeared. A week later, he was dead. Anyone else know it exists? Maybe. He mentioned someone was pressuring him, said he felt cornered. And you never reported this. He was still alive then. I thought he was being paranoid. Or he wasn't being paranoid enough. Vaughan reached into his desk drawer and handed me something wrapped in a glasses cloth. I shouldn't even have this. I found it wedged under his desk after they cleared his office. Nobody noticed it during the clean-up. It's his key fob? I unwrapped it. Silver. Simple, but definitely not for a car. It looked like the kind used for high-security storage lockers. I held it up. Where? He never said. But once I saw him take a call from a storage company, Midtown Secure Vaults. Sometimes the world has a sense of irony. Midtown Secure. Vaults was located 5 blocks from the brownstone. Wolfe could have walked there, assuming, of course, someone had set the city on fire and placed the vault directly under his chair. Brought the fob and the file information back to Wolfe and watched his eyebrows twitch upward by a fraction. Midtown Secure Vaults, I said. Rayner may have stored something off-site. The real diary, Wolfe murmured. It is the only artifact left unaccounted for. It would explain the clumsy forgery we received. The blank decoy. Rayner must have known they were watching him, swapped the real diary out, replaced it with a dummy, and stashed the real one. And they didn't know until it was too late. Until they searched the apartment and realized the one they had was clean. I nodded. "You want me to check it out?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "but do not go alone." He picked up the phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "Inspector Kramer, please. Tell him it's Mr. Wolfe." I arched my brow. Wolfe, involving the NYPD at this point, meant two things. We were dangerously close to the solution, and someone was likely to be very upset when we reached it. Kramer arrived at the brownstone an hour later, still chewing the end of a cigar he wasn't allowed to light indoors. He gave Wolfe a look like he wanted to toss him off the balcony, and nodded at me like I was the lesser evil. "What is it this time, Wolfe? Another aristocrat bleeding on your carpet? Mr. Goodwin will accompany you to Midtown Secure Vaults," Wolfe said, skipping pleasantries. "You will retrieve the contents of the locker key's contents. The locker belongs to Kenneth Rayner. I believe it contains the motive for his death." Kramer grunted. "And what do I get for playing errand boy?" The chance to close a suspicious death that was too easily ruled a suicide. That earned a scowl. "You better be right." We rode over in Kramer's car, me in the front seat, Kramer behind the wheel, and a police officer trailing in a black and white. At the vault facility, I handed the fob to the clerk, who led us into the belly of the building, a maze of steel corridors and chilled air. Locker, Year 917, was near the back. When the fob beeped green, the lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside, nestled in a velvet-lined box, was the diary. No decoy, no trickery, just a heavy leather-bound book, identical in style to the one Miss Rayner brought us, but dense with pages swollen from ink. Kramer opened it carefully and scanned a few entries. His brow furrowed. This guy was keeping tabs on everyone. Names, figures, dates, shell companies, multiple aliases, including one tied to Vincent Teller, another to Marble Key. He even references a woman he calls Il L. "Lakehurst," I said. Kramer looked up. "You got all this without me?" "Only the crumbs," I said. "The loaf's in your hands now." We sealed the diary and returned to the brownstone. Wolfe barely glanced up as I set the box before him. "Is it done?" he asked. "It is," I said. Rayner outfoxed them, hid the real diary, and left behind a decoy. They panicked, searched his apartment, found nothing, and decided the only way to ensure silence was permanent silence. Wolfe opened the diary slowly, reverently, like it was a sacred text. "Now," he said, "we shall read the truth before they try to bury it again." He turned the first page. And somewhere in the city, I swear, someone started to sweat. Chapter 10. The page. They tried to erase. The diary opened like a confession, neatly inked, dated with the kind of precision that belonged to men who feared chaos. Wolfe skimmed each entry with a quiet gravity, his thumb carefully guiding the page corners as if afraid the ink might dissolve if handled too quickly. I stood to the side, pacing slowly, waiting for the room to break into action. It didn't. Wolfe simply read. His eyes moved like they were measuring measurements, not words. Finally, he reached the middle of the book and tapped a page with the back of his knuckle. "Here," he said. "This is the fulcrum." I stepped closer and read over his shoulder. March 19th. Received second installment. $400,000 cash. No transfer. Records. Client identified only through intermediary. L. She insists anonymity is paramount. I requested documentation. She declined. Client is Belgian, she says, or connected to someone who is. She will not say more. The account was funded through Marble Key Holdings. Investment requested in high-risk foreign energy firms. I refused until legal assurance was offered. Began to suspect the capital was sourced unethically, possibly criminally. No proof yet, but I will make a record here. If I vanish, this is why. If this entry is ever blank, someone has touched my hands without my permission. I let out a low whistle. He saw it coming. Wolfe nodded slowly. Indeed, he feared erasure, not just of evidence, but of his intent. That is why he preserved the diary externally. He knew whoever came after him would destroy the original. He turned two more, pages. March 24th, spoke again with L. She grew agitated when I insisted on identity documentation. She threatened to find another handler, told me silence can be bought or arranged. I recorded the conversation. Tape is labelled Aves' side. Be hidden. Will advise if I relocate it. I blinked. Tape? He recorded her? Wolfe nodded. Apparently, hidden and labelled under a code name. I checked the margin. There it was, written in pencil. Aves' Beautiful Birds. Side B, I said. This guy was either paranoid, brilliant, or both. Yes, Wolfe said, and he was killed for it. Just then the phone rang. Wolfe gestured, so I picked it up. Goodwin. The voice on the other end was clipped. Female, accented, Belgian. You've gone too far, she said. I straightened. Have I? I get twitchy when someone erases diaries. There was a pause. You do not understand what you're meddling with. Try me. If you value what's left of your peace, you will destroy that diary and forget the name Kenneth Rayner. I leaned back. You're calling me from a line that Kramer's probably tracing as we speak. Click. The line went dead. I turned to Wolfe. That was her. Yes, he said calmly, and she's accelerating. She knows we have it. She suspected, Wolfe corrected. Now she's certain. Kramer showed up 30 minutes later, chewing his cigar into mulch and barking his way through the front door without waiting for Fritz to escort him in. You got a death threat, he said, jabbing a thumb at me. We traced the call. Hotel payphone in Chelsea. No camera coverage. She's rattled, I said. That's something. Wolfe handed over the diary, now bookmarked with torn strips of onion skin from his notes. Inspector, you will find sufficient material here to reopen the case. Kramer accepted it with a nod. We'll put surveillance on the woman's last known associate, Teller, and a flag on the name Lakehurst, if it pops up again. That will not be sufficient, Wolfe said, steepling his fingers. Miss Lakehurst is more adept than her associates. She will already be preparing her exit. Then we'll move. Fast. Move carefully, Wolfe warned. She does not merely evade, she eliminates. Kramer left with the diary under his arm and 2 patrolmen waiting at the curb. When the door shut, the brownstone felt quiet again. Too quiet. I turned to Wolfe. You think she'll come after us? No, he said, reaching for the book he'd been reading before all this began. She will not waste effort on vengeance. She will focus on preservation. And the recording? He glanced up. We find it before she does. I nodded. You think it's still out there? I do, Wolfe said, eyes drifting toward the windows. And I suspect it is closer than we imagine. Then we're not done yet. No, Wolfe said, lifting his cup of beer with his usual theatrical precision. Now, we are just beginning to corner the Queen. I don't know if it was instinct, caffeine, or the faint scent of lilies from the orchid room, but I could feel it. The noose was tightening. And somewhere in the city, a woman in gloves was already planning her next move. We'd taken her diary. Now we had to find her voice. Chapter 11. The Voice That Couldn't Be Silenced. I started with birds, not the feathered kind, though Wolfe would have happily lectured me on the evolutionary descent of starlings if I gave him the chance, but the kind Rayner had used as a code for his hidden recording. Aves? Side B. A tape, presumably, labelled under a decoy name and tucked where no one would look unless they were fluent in paranoid shorthand. Wolfe stayed behind in his chair, muttering about avian taxonomies and storage logic, while I returned to Rayner's apartment building on West 74th with a fresh set of lockpicks and a forged building inspection notice. His unit was still under probate hold, but that didn't stop me. I let myself in just before sunset. The place was a tomb. Quiet, elegant, cold. No signs of struggle, no overturned furniture. Just the scent of furniture polish and the ghost of a man who liked silence and order. I searched for everything. Drawers, floorboards, behind vents. The man might have documented global corruption, but he still used Scotch tape to seal the back of picture frames. By the time I reached his bookshelf, I was running dry on leads and patience. Then I found it, wedged behind a copy of Audubon's Field Guide to North American Birds. A cassette case, labelled Aves, side ABI, held it up like a crown jewel. Back at the brownstone, I fed the tape into Wolfe's old stereo system. Yes, Wolfe had insisted on keeping a stereo with analog capacity in case modernity failed us, which he declared it often did. Side A was uneventful. Rayner dictates notes about market trends and hedge fund anomalies. Dry stuff, unless you're into economic obituaries. But side B, that's where the story lived. We heard it in stereo, the clipped tones of a woman's voice, firm, elegant, European. It wasn't a full confession, but it was enough. Wolfe sat absolutely still, head tilted, as we listened. You will not write it down. That is the agreement, Miss Lakehurst. Rayner's voice, firm. You are too curious. Curious men do not live long in this business. If something happens to me, they will know. No, they will know nothing, unless they find this tape, and they won't. The conversation ended in static. I pressed stop. Wolfe closed his eyes. She thought herself untouchable, and now she is tethered by her own voice. We called Kramer. He arrived with a tight-lipped detective and a portable evidence kit, which he used like it was an insult to his dignity. Voice prints solid, he said after listening. We match this to her border entry logs, airline calls, or any security checkpoint. She's done. She won't wait to be caught, Wolfe said. She's already running. She'll slip, Kramer said, already out of the door. And when she does, I want her name in the papers. That left Wolfe and me alone again in the brownstone, with the tape spinning silently, and the last pages of the diary fanned out across the desk like a confession laid bare. I sank into my chair. "So," I said, "we've got a dead man's warning, a voice on tape, and a client whose idea of closure comes with a knife. What now?" Wolfe closed the diary and placed it gently on the stack. "Now," he said, "we wait." "Wait?" "Yes. Miss Lakehurst will make a final move. Desperate people always do." He looked at me. "And we must be ready when she does, because, unlike her, we do write things down." I nodded. Let's hope she underestimates that. Outside, the city went on as if none of it mattered. Sirens in the distance, cab horns calling out to no one, steam curling from manholes like whispers. But inside the brownstone we had the truth, and in Wolfe's world the truth never stayed buried long. Chapter 12. The Queen's Final Move. It ended, as most of Wolfe's cases did, in the office, under the high ceilings, between the ticking of the wall clock and the smell of orchids leaking faintly from the hall. Miss Eloise Rayner sat once, more in the red leather chair, across from Wolfe, hands clasped, lips drawn into a tight line. She looked different now, less haunted, more resolved, like someone who'd spent a week walking through fog and could finally see the streetlights. Kramer stood near the bookshelves, arms folded, chewing the remains of his latest unlit cigar. He wasn't smiling. He rarely did when Wolfe was right. Wolfe himself was seated, of course, behind his desk, rotund and immovable as ever, like the great Buddha of West 35th Street. His hands rested lightly on the arms of his chair. His eyes were half-lidded, but sharp. And I, your humble chronicler, leaned against the window-sill with a cup of coffee that Fritz had just delivered, watching as the last moves of a complicated game fell into place. "I have called you here, Miss Rayner," Wolfe said, "because the final thread has been pulled. The picture now is whole." She gave a slight nod. "Then tell me, who killed my father?" "Not one man," Wolfe said, "but a collaboration, and at the centre of it was Vivian Lakehurst, the woman your father only referred to as L." He tapped the open diary on the desk. She approached him through Vincent, teller, using marble key holdings as a front. Her aim was simple: to move large sums of money with no oversight. Your father, ever meticulous, documented everything, even when pressured not to. She panicked. Kramer added, and she wasn't alone. Teller acted as the domestic face. Breen, the driver, was the ghost on the ground. Between the three of them, they covered the route, moved the funds, and eventually conspired to silence your father. He knew, Wolfe continued, that his diary was a liability, so he hid it, replaced it with a blank. And then, as a final contingency, he recorded her voice. Wolfe gestured toward the recorder still sitting on the table, the tape inside, now part of Kramer's active case file. A short conversation, yes, but damning. Voice print analysis has confirmed the match. Vivian Lakehurst used at least 3 different identities over the past 5 years, all of them traceable to financial fraud cases in Europe. She was wanted in Belgium under a different name, Celeste Moreau. Eloise blinked. "She followed him. From Europe?" "No," Wolfe said softly. "She followed the opportunity. But your father's integrity made him a threat, and threats are removed. Kramer cleared his throat. She attempted to leave the country 2 nights ago. Bought a last-minute ticket to Brussels using a forged passport. We intercepted her at JFK. Eloise sat very still. Then she closed her eyes. So, that's it. No, Wolfe said. Not yet. He turned to me. Archie. I pulled out a small velvet box from the drawer and opened it. Inside was a flash drive. Your father's voice wasn't all he preserved, I said. We found a backup. On that drive are digitized scans of key pages from the diary, his private memos and full client records. Everything he knew. Your father left breadcrumbs not just for justice, but for you. Eloise reached for it slowly, like she didn't trust it to be real. Wolfe nodded. He wanted you to know the truth, and to have the choice of what to do with it. Kramer spoke again, voice rough. We'll take it from here. Charges are pending for Teller and the driver. RICO violations, conspiracy, obstruction. The feds are involved. It's a full house. The room fell quiet. After Kramer left, and after Miss Rayner said a quiet, tearful thank you, Wolfe finally stood. He crossed to the windows and opened them slightly, letting in the chilled New York air. That, in Wolfe terms, was as emotional as throwing open the gates. She will recover, he said after a moment. I nodded. She's tougher than she looks. Her father, too, Wolfe said, a man who knew the value of silence and the greater value of a record. I dropped back into the chair opposite him. So what now? Wolfe sank into his seat with a sigh of finality. Now, I return to my orchids. I've neglected them in the service of murder and money. They deserve better. I grinned. And me? You may rest if you must, until someone else is clever enough to think they've committed the perfect crime. I leaned back, crossed one ankle over the other, and sipped my coffee. Outside, New York moved on. Clattering taxis, muffled arguments, steam curling through subway grates. But in the brownstone, order had been restored. Wolfe would never say it, but he liked that feeling, of disorder made neat, of truth emerging, even when buried under silence and fear, and me. I just liked the coffee hot, the case closed, and the Queen finally cornered.